Hey folks, this week's episode is going to be dedicated to me dying. A lot. Because I happened to receive a review key of Chaos Forge's Doom-flavored roguelike, Jupiter Hell. And I do mean roguelike, so you can expect a far more brutal experience than their lighter peers. But that begs the question, doesn't it? Was Jupiter Hell a punishing experience I was doomed to fail at? Or did I come away feeling that this roguelike was out of this world? I'm your host Arlyeon. Let's find out together. Mark Taggart was simply another grunt of the spacefaring Marine Corps. That said, things took a turn when his pod was suddenly shot down by Allied forces, sending it crashing into Jupiter's lunar Callisto base. Still, he barely has time to gather himself, as soon he finds himself welcomed by the reanimated remains of Callisto's crew and the demonic forces responsible for the massacre. With his only means of escaping in flames, his path out is forward, ripping and tearing through the legions that stand in his path, in the hopes they might find a way to annihilate the invasion at its root. Now, the crux of this, you're shown early on, as Jupiter Hell has a solid intro movie to help kick things off. That said, there is some extra lore elements you'll only come to discover as you play the game, and well, if you're so inclined, given that simply barreling your way forward to the game is certainly a viable decision. That said, there's some neat bits of lore to uncover as you explore the various moon bases, all of which help to highlight the living conditions and just how things came to be. That said, while a number of the terminal entries serve to provide some flavor and context to the overall world, others serve a distinct purpose, essentially providing players hints as to where certain items might be, or what activating certain terminals might do, all framed within the context of journals between characters. It's pretty neat, honestly. And it helped a ton, because Jupiter Hell is a brutal, difficult experience. I mean, I should have expected this, given the game's a purer take on the rogue genre, properly leaning into the moniker of roguelike. Yeah, that's right, if you're coming into this expecting meta progression and ways to gradually ease off the simple suffering inherent in surviving, well, that's mostly going to hinge on you learning the nuances of the game. For instance, given that this game serves as what if Doom was a turn-based beast, there is a heavy focus on ranged combat. That's right, the crux of your arsenal will be various flavors of gun. Pistols, shotguns, rocket launchers, and more, all with their distinct ranges, ammo types, and other miscellany. And yet, this doesn't make things easier because now you're left with a number of logistical problems. For one thing, ammo concerns will definitely crop up as you venture deeper throughout Jupiter's moons, given you have a limited inventory and need to balance out both your munitions, healing items, and keycards. And that's if you can even find the ammo you need, given that certain types of munitions start out as uncommon or become rare as you progress further. Like, yes, there are ways to offset this, but really, that's only the start of what you really need to keep track of, because, like I said, there's a focus on gunplay, and that includes much of your opposition. And let me tell you, when all your enemies are packing heat, it suddenly behooves you to be a lot more tactical about your approach. Thankfully, you do have some options here. Movement, for instance, not only allows you to get out of an enemy's line of sight, it also provides you an evasion bonus in order to increase your odds of survival. That said, one of the key mechanics you'll be relying on is likely cover. Yep, sometimes you just really need to find a pile of boxes or a wall to hunker up against, something that not only hinders your attempts at enemies Swiss cheesing you, it also buys you time to line up the shot needed to pulp your assailants. Or to reload in peace, given that also provides a turn to your angry adversaries. And another reason this is pretty damn important is getting hit actually reduces your overall accuracy due to a pain debuff, something which can turn even a tenable situation into a nightmare in a few agonizing shots. That said, cover also happens to be a mechanic your adversaries can take advantage of, and that can get really tense if you wind up pinned behind destructible cover as an increasing amount of undead marines pile into your room, drawn by the sound of gunfire, because yes, that's a thing, they can hear you, as are demons tracking you by the scent left in your wake. Yay! Nowhere safe! And everything is suffering. Still, that's part of Jupiter Hell's charm. The other part is the way that it empowers you to overcome the horrific, awful, painful doom awaiting you, such as the class and perk system. See, at the game's onset, you're given a choice between 3 distinct classes: the Marine, the Scout, and the Technician. Each of these come equipped with a unique, usable ability tied to the class's resource, as well as a perk tree you'll gradually fill up as you level up during a given run. Marines, for instance, have a solid amount of survivability options at their disposal, including turning the previously mentioned pain modifier into health. Scouts, as a general rule, are stealthy boys, and Technicians are, well, tech boys, with a very specific affinity for getting the most out of the game's item modding system. And yes, I'll get to that, but first, that's the basic gist of these classes, but doesn't actually end there. So you're likely to end up getting somewhere between levels 15 and 17 in a fairly thorough run of Jupiter Hell, which means out of the various perk trees, you'll only have something like 14 to 16 perk points to spend on making a cohesive character build to complement the items you found and the way you play, with the most noteworthy perks being the master abilities. Not only do these perks have very specific prerequisites, they also only become available at level 8. But then again, they represent different apexes for your class. For instance, you can become outright immune to being one-shot when over a certain amount of health as a Marine, or significantly boost the efficacy of shotguns, missile launchers, and slash weapons. Scouts can become that guy from Equilibrium, or do the equivalent of tipping their fedora and teleporting behind a guy to end his life. And Technicians? How does summoning robot allies sound? Or immunity to splash damage and being set on fire? Or becoming a swordmaster? The amount of variety here, especially in tandem with all those items you will be finding, is delightful. Like, the amount of satisfaction I felt when I actually got a melee-oriented build going, that's really hard to properly express, because I went from wall hugging to zipping along between cover only to obliterate an enemy in one hit, heal from doing so, and then dicing up his buddy on a diagonal, because melee weapons are the only way you can move diagonally, and it is a delight. Just, also don't be me and get too overconfident. As satisfying as it can be, there are a lot of melee-oriented demons, and if you're unfortunate to come across an exalted, read elite, enemy, well, you can go from 0 to murked in one fateful turn, though maybe that's my fault for playing on hard. The fact that exalted enemies come in threes, though, really isn't helpful. Though I do appreciate the fact that they drop bundles of gear, including cursed relics that provide boons and banes, to make the effort a little more worthwhile. Mostly. But right, so before I got on this tangent, I think I owed you folks a small clarification on one of the Technician's fortes, namely the item modification system. These are actually useful to all the classes as they enable you to provide some pretty solid modifiers to the gear you pick up. That said, it's a bit random what you'll get as an option when you use a mod, and it would in fact behoove you to invest in the perk that optimizes your choices and lets you cram more into an item. Especially since Technician can spec into being able to freely pull out mods in order to customize future items and prevent them from being lost when armor breaks, which, yeah, that's a thing. But whether or not I was playing as a Technician, my loadout and what I'd managed to kit myself out with wound up informing the way I played the game drastically. I don't just mean the skills I started to lean into either. See, there's this multitude of paths that you can take on each of Jupiter Hell's moons. In fact, those lore terminals I talked about allow you to scout out which specific paths are on a given moon and which floor you can veer off on to explore them. Heck, they even hint at the kind of loot waiting for you at the end. That said, one of the most useful reasons to take a different path is because of the event elevators that can be found in each one. Every biome in Jupiter Hell has a special level associated with it, and a couple for the main routes, which provides some very rough challenges, but rewards that tend to make up for the effort, if you survive. For instance, I managed to find a Cry Backpack Relic, which these permanently upgrade your inventory space, and I found a helmet that caused anything robotic to ignore my existence. This was in one event room, which, yeah, amazing. And like other bits of unique armor and weaponry, this one had the ability to level up, bypassing the risk of being closer to robots and the resources needed to typically hack them and doing it automatically at higher levels, which would have been awesome if I hadn't been murdered 2 floors into IO. Frankly, my countless deaths are probably why I started to lean harder into the game's trials, These represent a way of mixing up the main game, such as Trials of Haste, which shortens the overall length of areas, but halves the experience you need to level, allowing you to explore builds in the game in a much more fast-paced manner. There's also the challenges, which provide things like Angel of Carnage, where you can only wield rocket launchers for better or worse, or Angel of Confidence, which yeets you into the second moon, Europa, at level 1. It's fine. I mean, sure, you don't have access to easy mode for trials or challenges, but I was playing on hard anyways. Who needs to live? Because I'm a complete twit that never learns, and yes, for you masochists in the audience, there's even harder difficulties than hard. There's 2, in fact. But you know what? You know what other options you have? Audio options. Like disabling the Marine from cursing. I don't know why you'd activate it, but it's there. Then again, so is the bangin' music. Really, just about everything for the sound design in Jupiter Hell makes me happy, because not only is it a blast to rip and tear while listening to the OST, there's something to be said for the ambient noises and the utility of being able to hear the footfalls of nearby enemies. The visuals are stellar as well, whether it's the stylish intro into the game or the in-game graphics proper. This game is a joy to witness, and yes, I know there are some purists in the audience who would rather this all be done up in ASCII, and to those folks, I simply have this to say. It's apparently a work in progress. Your horrific, symbolic eyesore will one day be a reality. But for my own part, I'd rather be able to take advantage of being able to see the faraway hints of a reanimated grunt's flashlight piercing the gloom of the base. Please and thank you. I love how it just gives them away even with a fog of war. But yeah, this is really the gist of what I have to say about Jupiter Hell. My time with it has been replete with failure, with so many runs ending ignobly and even a few blowing up in the final area. And yet, despite the fact that I'm empirically a failure when it comes to progressing in this title, I've had a lot of fun. While Jupiter Hell is certainly a purer take on the roguelike genre than a number of its peers, I never really felt that was unfair as an experience. If anything, it provided me a lot in the way of just tools to challenge Jupiter's moons. And I found myself testing out a variety of approaches and paths over the span of a couple weeks. Really, the only sticking point for me ultimately was a minor crash bug that would occasionally occur when I booted up the game. I think it might be tied to me zooming through the menus too quickly and not choosing a name, but honestly, I have no real idea here. It just happened and was annoying. But given it didn't actually get in the way of my bite-sized bouts of Bloodsport, well, it didn't really influence my overall enjoyment of the game. Which brings me to my intro question, and, yeah. Maybe it was unfair of me to pose the question the way I did, because while I am pretty garbage at Jupiter Hell, I've had a lot of fun with it. It's just a great game that I'm trash at, and ultimately I do think it's worth diving into, which is why I can safely call it a hit. Especially if you're a fan of traditional rogues. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord, links in the description to become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. That said, catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.